their recommended budget, and we go over that with the different department heads to review what they've done, and we have an opportunity to reflect on that. So it's I don't think that we over the 12 years that I've been associated with the budget committee, we've gotten rid of a lot of the wants and have really recognized a lot of the needs. And some of the expenses that you're talking about and the increases on an annual basis of our rate, our tax rate, has come with the replacement of some major assets in this community. Our fire stations were in a deplorable condition. They've been used for years and years. They had been maintained, but they were out of date. Big expense items that have come up. That's why we have a CIP program that looks at the coming needs of the community. So that have to be replaced. We've got to replace fire trucks. We've got to replace many of the items. Plus, we're living in an economy that's now global, and it's inflationary. Now, I don't know how, if you live, I hear people tell me that, well, we got to cut taxes. Okay, in an inflationary economy on a global basis, as it affects, because we've got so many outside forces coming in to affect what we pay for gasoline, what we pay for tires, what we pay for everything else. How do you absorb that and try to cut your taxes? Well, in reality, the only way you can really make headway against that is you replace some of the assets that have gone beyond their age, is you got to cut services. That's the only way you can do that. Well, we don't. When we volunteered at the various communities that we looked at how we could contribute and how we could increase and maybe make the services better to pass on to the next generation rather than living on the past of the other generations. So you got to go through this process. Well, there's 7 of us, or 8 with the selectmen, that go over these items, and I think we've done an excellent job in keeping our. If you look at the overall rates for the 222 towns, actual towns in New Hampshire, we're at 11.81 for our overall rate. There's only 8 towns in this state that are lower than we are. And the average is somewhere up in the 20s to 25. So it's not that we've been frivolous with the money or that we haven't concerned ourselves with the increases. Any tax increase hurts people, but in an inflationary system, you don't have the same purchasing power of your dollar that you had back in the 1950s, and it just keeps on growing and growing, and you've got to keep up if you want your community to survive. To me, it's the budget is basically an estimate of what you're going to be doing for the next year. And you've got to look at what's going to be happening during that period of time and what your needs are going to be in the future. So it's not one individual sitting at the desk making decisions. There's 6 of us that are sitting there, and we're all contributing our thoughts, and we're not cavalier about it. But there are concerns that have to be made, and we've got to make sure that if we're really serious about our community, that we're passing on a community to the future that makes sense, and that we're not just building empires. And if I'm elected, I'm going to continue to do that. And if somebody comes up to me and asks me to go and cut taxes, reduce the tax base, I'm going to ask them, what service do you want to get rid of? And then tell me where you want to go. And then generally, you get a blank stare because they're not quite sure. Do you want to get rid of the welfare program or the needs of community? Do you want to get rid of maybe a couple of the trucks up at the fire station? Or do you want to get rid of your, go down those 30 items and take a look at what we're only dealing, if you look at the overall rate that you have, we only control 26% of that rate and as an operating budget. The rest of it all goes to education, county. So we don't have much to play with. And when you start playing with it and you start taking away services from your community, it's like taking food, you know, if you've had children, you know, it doesn't stop when the child is born, you gotta feed it. And you know, we've been feeding what we have and the assets of this community, we've been feeding it for years. And what we've got is all been approved by the voters and the legislature of this town. So we just can't stop feeding it. It's there, it's been approved, the people want it. And so that, if you want me to continue with that thought process, then I ask for your vote. And if you don't, I'm going to vote for somebody else.
Now, any questions? Thank you. I know it's getting late, but all right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Last position on the evening is for selectmen, Bill Marcus and Guy Butler.
I would hope the glare from my head doesn't blind me.
Bill, go first.
Okay. Hi. I think most of you know me. I'm Bill Markison. I've lived in Tuftonboro since 2007, and I've had the honor of being a selectman for you for the last 3 years. We, in our lives, have lived a lot of places around the country, a lot of different settings, mainly in towns larger than Tuftonboro. It was an adjustment when we moved here in 2007, but we really enjoy this community. Worked here more than a couple of years before I got involved as a volunteer, working with the CIP committee and with milfoil control in the waters of Lake Winnipesaukee along the shores of Tuftonboro. And one thing leads to another. And I've enjoyed my years of service on those committees as well as a selectman over the last several years. The board has dealt with a number of challenging issues. Not every time have we dealt with them in a way that, looking back, I would do exactly the same again. But we have also continued to strive for ways for the town to be more efficient in using the dollars that we collect and in building our budgets to strike a balance between provision of services and needs for year-round residents as well as summer folk. Let's face it, a lot of what we collect in taxes comes from properties that are only used seasonally, and it's important that we and the services that they need from the town are less than those of us that are here year-round. So it's important that we meet everybody's needs for services and facilities here in the community. Any of you who know me know I'm not particularly long-winded, so I'll just stop right there and we can move along.
Thank you, Bill.
This If not, I'll just say that I have three basic concerns, some of which Bill has already addressed. One is trying to increase the efficiency of our operations in town. Another is engaging the public much more than has been done in the last few years. I look out here, I see people, you didn't come here tonight because you're bored with television. You want to hear what people have to say. If you've already made up your mind, you wouldn't be here. It's that simple. We have a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I think we need to engage our public with much more effort that's been put out by the Board of Selectmen in the last few years. My other concern, which I am extremely passionate about, my last few years in heavy construction were in groundwater reclamation. After reading the studies, the most recent study of our capped landfill especially, and what they drew from the Stantec reports and the information they had, tends to disagree with the paper just a little bit. We have exceeded our limits several times. We now have a seep running through the landfill, which will only get worse in my experience. It takes decades sometimes for this to happen. I think we're really going to need to monitor that heavily. It could be millions of dollars to fix that when the thing really breaks out and things start to happen. And I tend to share the outrage of one of our selectmen in the fact that the town of Wolfboro can simply buy property and place their treated wastewater into the town of Tuftonboro. My experience from the Mirror Lake Watershed Committee tells us that cyanobacteria flourishes at half of the state's allowable discharge limits for phosphorus. That alone, should a breakout occur, could cause a problem both in Winnipesaukee and Mirror Lake. So basically, these are my three platform tenets, if you will, and obviously we're here to answer questions if you have them.
Thank you, Guy. Questions? This is what happens at 8:15.
I have one question. Doesn't the Conservation Commission address the water issue at all? Do they get involved in that?
From my viewpoint, and what I've been able to glean from watching selectmen's meetings, since I'm not able to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning yet, however, if I was elected, I certainly would make the time. Their efforts to be good neighbors, I think they've actually failed us in a bad way. I think they could have done a lot more to pay attention. They could have protested strongly, much more strongly than they have. And if we don't start to increase our efforts to pay attention to what's going on, we're only going to have more problems. That's just my opinion.
Have you spoken with anyone on the commission at all about it?
I have sat in meetings many times in the Mirror Lake Watershed Commission with Steve Wingate, for example. Go on.
Any other questions? Max?
I understand there's, with the issue with Wolfboro, is that there is some kind of agreement with Wolfboro in terms of their commitment to keep the water clean. What happens if they fail to meet that commitment? What is our recourse?
They have an operating permit from the state of New Hampshire
Okay.
that they operate their rapid infiltration basins under. And once they initially opened them and the system failed, then they had to shut it down, went into I want to say it was a provisional arrangement with the state. My understanding is if they don't satisfy the terms of their agreement with the state shuts them down. There are certainly legal steps that the town of Tuftonboro can take with respect to that as well.
I think Bill's covered that fairly well. My concern here is that the frequency of testing allows a certain time frame where almost anything could happen before the next samples are taken. And a lot of trouble can happen in a very short time under the conditions, for example, of the breakups that they had. They also appear to have no desire, no, I won't say that, they have no desire to help us in our testing program.
So what would you do if you were in a position?
I would actually encourage the voters to go to a more frequent testing regimen. And because the way hydrological things work, water tends to take its path of least resistance. And although you can use radar and sonar and you can say this ledge is here and that's there, it's already been proven that the water will go where it wants to go. What's going to happen to water dumped into Tuftonboro at the rate they would like to dump it in is anyone's guess. And although educated guesses have been made, I don't think doing more of the same field program is a good idea.
Chris, do you have a question?
I was just curious, that, I know, Bill, you said that there would be legal steps you could take, but it's kind of, it sounds like maybe being reactive might not be a good approach. Is there a proactive approach that maybe the board is taking right now? Because it sounds a little concerning. I mean, clean water is very important, and if we are quote unquote the dumping ground, it's very concerning. I was just wondering if there's any proactive measures being taken at this point.
There is, and one of the items on the warrant this year is about $45,000 worth of testing to update the baseline in the 19-mile brook study that was done back in, I believe it was 2008. That will give us a current snapshot of what the conditions are in that watershed area downstream from the rapid infiltration basin, to be used as a direct comparison with the original baseline that was done before they opened the RIPs. And in my view, as we get the data, we can then see what has changed, and in an ongoing monitoring program can watch for any concerning developments.
Is the monitoring part of the warrant as well? Is that included in those monies?
It's an update with monitoring through a full year, but it's not beyond a year in the current update. So I would envision that we're going to have to continue to do monitoring going forward. That's how we know what the conditions in the watershed are.
What is the monitoring schedule now? I mean, when was the last time tests were done? How often do they have to be done?
There is
According to the agreement.
there has, before the rapid infiltration basin was opened, there was a baseline study done. There has been monitoring done, I believe it's annually since then, but on a somewhat abbreviated basis, not extremely thorough. The study that we're going to be doing this year is an update to the original monitoring that was done back in, I believe it was 2008.
And the state is the one who has okayed this not thorough monitoring?
No, the state is not controlling what we're doing, okay? The state gives the town of Wolfboro a permit to use
Right.
the water discharge system. And
Under certain guidelines,
they do monitoring in accordance with the requirements of their permit. This is monitoring that we're doing beyond what Wolfboro does and downstream of the Wolfboro site.
Barry?
I was just wondering, is there any recourse that you say there's a warrant article, $40,000 to do that? Is there any recourse to say, that's Wolfboro stuff they're dumping on us? maybe they should help pay for that also.
Be a nice idea, wouldn't it?
Because it's their stuff, it's in Tupton Borough now, they're the source. Why should we put the bill on all that? We're not responsible for that.
I would, as a selectman, certainly consult the town's attorney and get his opinion on what we might be able to do with that. I would really be surprised if our selectmen have not already done that, because they're pretty thorough about these kind of things. Now, what his advice was, I don't personally know right at the moment. Getting a little back more on the subject of engaging the public, Paul Matlock, would you mind telling us what your field of expertise is or was?
I was a chemist.
So you understand the terms titration.
I do.
You know the relationship between pH and hydronium ion concentration.
Yes, I do.
You know how to perform a precipitation and what you can do, these kind of things. There's an example of someone who could look at scientific data and help us interpret it if we asked him of a chemical nature. This is the kind of thing I think we need to reach out much more to our people and see what they can do for us. Thank you.
Any other questions? Max?
We could change the subject to the roads, which we all drive on. Do you have any specific ideas about the roads and maintaining the roads? Last year, the summer maintenance was significantly curtailed, as I understand, because of cost overruns for winter maintenance, plowing. But if we don't do the summer work, it's going to degrade the roads faster. So if any, either one of you have, or both of you, could you please say if you have any specific suggestions?
Oh, well, E actually comes before O, as in E6 and O.
Go ahead.
Little joke for us military people. One of my, not this particular budget year, but the year before, one of the things I brought forth to the budget committee was the fact that both the state and the federal government recommend top coating new pavement within 2 weeks after it being laid down. We lay our pavement down and let it sit for a year, which allows water and other contaminants to mess with it. It also loses its abrasive and bonding capabilities by driving over it. What I had suggested at that point in time was that we double the budget and actually do our roads in that manner, and they would last longer. Now that would come not out of the budget itself, but out of a warrant article for paving. All right, but that does address some road issues. The selectmen have increased the budget this year to try and keep up with winter maintenance. I'm not sure how that's going yet. I do know we've done a lot in January from listening to the selectmen's meetings. I'm sure they'll have a number available for us if we give them just a chance to process through. I'm hoping that's going to do it, but a lot of this comes down to efficiency. I look around, we're not a young community anymore. All right, I grew up in a town where a foot of snow was a big deal. The 2 bus drivers put the chains on and we went to school. Now, a foot of snow is a major disaster. I drove up Ledge Hill Road yesterday morning. One side of it was dry. There was a sanding truck coming down, sanding the whole road. Ham Hill had been salted, very obviously. On my way home, coming across Durgan Road, I barely made it up over the top of the hill at Downs Hill, and the Durgan Road looked like it had received almost no maintenance. Why? I don't know. I've witnessed a lot of inefficient ways of doing things over the years. I've seen very much so in the last few years. I think the selectmen have some control over that. They might ought to pay attention a little closer, and they could actually help out quite a bit. Mr. Officer.
Thank you, Guy. We did skimp on summer maintenance last year because of excessive cost of doing the winter maintenance. There's more money in the budget this year, and at the budget hearing the other night, we talked about the fact that it is important to do the summer maintenance as well. If the amount of money that we use for winter maintenance, again, is inordinately high, then we're probably going to fall short again during the summer. We work within a total budget for the year, and the key is to be able to address all of the issues Roadside mowing is important, crack sealing is important, ditch maintenance is important, culvert maintenance is important. The money that gets addressed to storm events, whether they be in the summer or the winter, is an urgent issue. It happens now and it gets done now. And the important other maintenance that needs to get done sometimes gets squished off around the edges. I don't have a crystal ball, so I cannot say with certainty that as we look forward this year, the summer maintenance that needs to get done, that there will be money to do it. But I will tell you that we're very cognizant that winter doesn't end April 1st, that in the budget year, we have about 6 to 8 weeks of winter at the end of the year, and we have to be able to deal with storm events at that point as well. So it's an iterative process. Just throwing money at it doesn't work, but just constricting the amount of money that's available certainly doesn't work either.
Carl?
I was wondering if you both could elaborate on the road study that was done and how that's going to play out going forward when you are talking about the roads. You know which ones you must do and...
Well, Lakes Region Planning Commission did this road surface evaluation for us this past summer, which graded each segment of pavement on all town roads according to, I think it was about a half a dozen different criterias. And it's a visual grading. It's not drilling into the highway to see what's underneath it, but just observing the surface. And based upon that, each segment of road is assigned a score that's done with a state database in terms of how the grading is done. Armed with that data, we can then determine that based upon the traffic usage that we have over the roads and the weather that we generally see here in Tuftonboro, that particular section of road, if we do nothing to it, the condition is going to go from where it is today down to where it needs to be rebuilt in X amount of time. Or if we do an intermediate maintenance activity on it now, then that will extend the life of the pavement. So what the study did is got plugged into a state transportation pavement model that produced a set of recommendations for us in terms of the roads that need to be repaved, which segments, when, and what intermediate maintenance activities can be done.
Were they ranked numerically then, each
Yes.
road? Okay.
Yeah, they are. And that study is available at the town office. I think it may be on the website as well. A lot of data there. It's you can get down in the weeds pretty quick. But it gave us a couple of different scenarios looking out over a 10-year period of levels of rebuilding and maintenance support and what effect it would have in terms of the overall road condition.
But it's a visual inspection, right? I mean, the data that you have is just based on a
It's
visual.
a visual inspection of the roads, yeah.
John?
John LaPola, I live up here off of Ledge Hill Road. Back to winter maintenance. What is the snow on the road when it should be plowed? Because I do notice, and I can hear the plow, I'm a plow contractor, and I have doctor's offices at half an inch of snow, I have to go out. What is it on our town roads when the plow truck should go out? Because you get a half an inch of snow on Ledge Hill, quarter of an inch of snow, and you get a plow truck going. I just like to know, because that would cut down costs on winter maintenance right there. So the guys aren't out plowing up, then sanding, and plowing, and sanding, and salting, and all that. Just was wondering what the road coverage is before they go out.
I don't have a specific answer for you on how the road agent, when he calls his trucks out and gets them out.
Yeah. I do know sometimes they're out before the state's even out. Wow.
We have a winter maintenance policy and a snow plowing policy. They're both on the website.
Yeah.
They're a little bit conflicting, but if you actually go and read it, you'll find out that it's at the road agent's discretion.
Okay.
Now, I also know that the police chief making rounds and his officers have on occasion found a spot that they thought needed to be dealt with immediately and called dispatch, who called the road agent, and he sent his people out to do that.
Yeah.
Now, the usage of salt and sand, etc., is all in those policies, but basically it's at the road agent's discretion. If you need help finding those, I'll be glad to help you with that, but it is on the town website. Sometimes it's a little not intuitive how to get where you want to go, but they are there. And that's something I think that we need to revisit as well.
I think, you
I think
know,
we're using way too much salt. That's just me.
well, I just think, you know, he's got so many personnel, I just think that where they go at a certain amount of snow and stuff like that, you know, should be controlled by the selectmen.
You gotta know that Tuftonboro Corner is gonna get 4 inches when we get a ½ inch down here.
I know,
Again, that's-
I live halfway, I live halfway there, I get more than you do. so.
We have very distinct weather patterns in areas here in town.
I'm wondering, does the Board of Selectmen, or how does the school interact with you? Because we're all worried about school bus safety. So if we're worried about cutting back on plowing, what would that mean for the schools?
Well, that's a good question, and they don't directly interact with the town as it relates to whether they delay or call off school. Quite honestly, I don't know exactly what the school district plugs into with respect to that.
Chris, I'm gonna do one more.
I'm just answering Carla. What happens with the schools, just 17 years here, the superintendent consults with the state and local towns and that's how they decide. They don't do the individual towns. The superintendent makes that call.
Okay, but I mean, if we were going to cut back on plowing and salting and sanding, my concern would be the school buses.
No, nobody's talking about cutting back.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, they're just talking about.
I am.
Okay.
well, yeah.
In my 12 years of riding on public transportation, so to speak, to and from school, I don't recall a single time that a bus went off the road or that anyone got hurt. Now, if someone has evidence to the contrary, I'd love to hear it, but we used to push one of the school buses. And I'll tell you what, 50, 60 kids can push a school bus up a mile of grade.
We're all starting to sound real old here.
We all went to school when there was 8 inches of snow.
I can also say that the buses now have a chain system called on-spot chains,
Okay.
which actually can be lowered down hydraulically, and they rotate around under the wheels, so that should they come upon something unexpected, they do have a means of it moving along slowly and more safely than having nothing else.
Okay.
And although that really doesn't apply to why I'm running for selection, thanks.
Okay, and with that, we're gonna wrap it up.
Thank everyone.
Before everyone leaves, I'm gonna ask Steve Wingate to come up for just a minute. He wants to talk to you about the warrant article.
I'm sorry. I'm glad I'm not running for office. So there'll be a warrant article at town meeting, and it's gonna ask you to increase the amount of land use change tax that goes, land use change tax.
Quiet,
I'm gonna explain this.
What?
The amount of land use change tax that goes to the Conservation Commission. So like back in the 1960s, when development was going crazy, and town assessors were trying to find ways to raised more taxes, they started assessing land based on its development value in a lot of communities. And the taxes of some of these landowners, farmers, forest owners, went up so high they had to sell their land because they couldn't afford to pay the taxes. And this was happening all over the country. So the idea of current use taxes came along, and after a few years of effort in 1973, New Hampshire adopted a current use tax. And the current use tax says if you apply and you qualify, you can be taxed only on the use of your land, not its speculative value. So if you have a forest over 10 acres and you like it that way, you can only be taxed for that, for the income that that forest produces. And the same thing for farms. The incentive to keep it, so you're a landowner and you're in current use, the incentive to keep it in current use is the land use change tax. So if you take it out of current use and you put it into another use, say you develop it, then you're assessed a 10% penalty tax, and it's 10% of the new value of the land. So let's say you had a forest acre that was formerly worth $1,000, and you change that into a development acre, which is now worth $20,000, you would pay $2,000 land use change tax. And when the legislation went through, the idea was that Conservation Commission could take that money and then invest it into conservation land as kind of a replacement. It's like 1/10 replacement, but it's kind of a replacement. So that's how the idea was. But when the legislature sent it through, they said the community could decide how to allocate that money. And in Tuftonboro, right now, the allocation is 50%, but not more than $5,000 a year. And our land values are such now that 50% is always a much larger number than $5,000 a year. The objection to doing more is that it's something that the voters don't vote on. You know, it's money the Conservation Commission and the voters don't have a say in it. Conservation can spend it. That's the objective. Well, actually, it goes into what's called the Conservation Fund, which is authorized by RSA 36A, and it's regulated, it has state regulations, and it can only be used to buy conservation land or conservation easement. And whenever we do that, we have to go to the selectmen to get approval anyway. So there is a layer of, and also the Conservation Commission has to have a public hearing. And it's not something we do very often. So the Conservation Fund winds up something like a savings account. We put a little money in, it adds up, and someday there's an opportunity, and if you've ever messed around with real estate, you know some of those opportunities don't last very long. When a piece of particularly special property comes on the market, sometimes you gotta act fast. And that's where the Conservation Fund can come in, rather than saying, well, we'll have to wait for town meeting, and then we'll have to ask at town meeting whether we can buy this property or not. So what we're asking for is to increase the limit from $5,000 a year to $10,000 a year, kind of bring it up to date between inflation and values and everything else. The language, which is legalized, is going to be difficult to understand. That's what we're asking for, increase it from 5,000 to 10,000, so that we can build a little more nest egg to do good things. There.
Steve, two questions. First, what is the current balance in the Conservation Fund? And secondly, why $10,000? Why not all of the penalty?
We talked it over with the selectmen, and that's what the selectmen would support. And our current balance is about $24,000, and that's about 6 years worth of savings.
It used to be considerably more, as I remember, when I was involved with the conservation.
When you were involved, we had approximately $40,000, and we spent 30 of that acquiring some Great Meadow property, and it was a situation where it was a limited amount of time we had to work with. And we did have a hearing, and we did get approval from the selectmen. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Steve. Thank you all for coming, and don't forget to vote next month.
So this is,